For more on this, we are being joined by Syed Javed Hassan, an economic columnist and former chairman of the Economic Advisory Group. He is joining us from London. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sir, what do you think the budget will be today? Because, on the one side, there are populist schemes because there are elections that are coming. It's likely to be a populist budget. And on the other, Pakistan has the opportunity to show the world and the IMF that this budget is one step towards long-term structural reforms by giving out a fiscal prudence policy. So how do you think the government is going to balance this, populism versus fiscal prudence?
I think Pakistan doesn't have any options but to adopt fiscal prudence right now. Really, more than anything else, it needs to revive the IMF program, which is the 9th review has been stalled for the last 6 months. If it doesn't do so, we will go out of the program, which ends at the end of this month in June, and without completing it. And that would be quite disastrous because effectively it would suggest that Pakistan has a very likelihood of default. Having said all that, as you have pointed out, there's an election coming up this year, and the government will want to provide a budget that is pro-people, so to speak. Now, I feel that there is a likelihood that the government will err on the side of populism rather than prudence. And there we have a real danger. And from what we have heard, the public sector spending proposals are something in the tune of 1 trillion. Now, that's something that will certainly not please IMF. The total revenue collection that is targeted is something like 9.2 trillion. From my understanding, IMF is looking for a much higher figure in terms of revenue generation. So it remains to be seen how Pakistan and the government meets the IMF conditionality that whatever budget there is, it should be in line with the objectives of the EFF program that it currently is in. I am fearful that the present government will err on the side of populism rather than prudence.
Sir, let's also talk about tax collections. That has increased in the last fiscal, but most of it seems to be going for debt repayment. So do you think the government will have a plan to put the tax money for public good rather than divert it for debt repayment? Is there room for doing that?
There isn't any room, given that the interest rates have jumped up quite dramatically in the current year by something like 8%. It's currently borrowing costs for the government are around 21%. And that's likely to go up further if it is to meet IMF demands. So the spending in terms of just interest payments is something to the tune of 7 trillion. And as I've mentioned, the total government revenue is 9.2 trillion. So once you have the provincial allocations from the overall revenue, there's very little to spend in terms of federal deficit, in terms of federal spending. Nevertheless, I think they do plan to have a budgetary spend for development, and that will all be from borrowed money. It remains to be seen how will they finance this spending, given that unless we are back in the IMF program, we will not have any funding either from IMF, World Bank, multilateral agencies. And we have to remember the credit markets right now are closed. International credit markets are closed to Pakistan effectively, with the bond rates trading at yields are trading at something like 100%. It's highly unlikely that Pakistan will be able to raise money through international markets. So it really is a conundrum, which I really fail to understand how the government plans to have these budgetary spend programs.
Right, so we'll talk about foreign investment in just a bit, but talking about the current account deficit, the government seems to be blaming the previous regime, which was the Imran Khan government. What are the options in front of the government, to narrow the current account deficit?
In the short term, very few. And moreover, if it does try to narrow it by putting import restrictions, that has a severe impact in terms of the overall economy. And that's what the government has tried to do. It's tried to basically stop imports by administrative measures, even though it claims there are no such administrative measures. Now, effectively, what it has done is a lot of the industries which are import dependent, they have had to suffer and suffered quite considerably. In the last month, the large-scale manufacturing has fallen by 25% for the month year on year. Overall, large-scale manufacturing has fallen by 8% year on year for the year. And that's largely driven by the import restrictions that have been placed. So if they place any further import restrictions to balance the payments, to have a BOP in surplus, frankly speaking, the economy will tank even further. And already unsubstantiated or undocumented reports suggest unemployment is close to 11%. If there's further contraction in the economy, you could see this unemployment skyrocket.
Also, sir, let's talk about the food inflation. Now, Pakistan's food inflation, both rural and urban areas, reached 48.1% recently, the highest since the financial year 2016. What are the government steps here to reduce that food inflation? Because that's really pinching the common person.
It's not only since 2016, it's probably highest in the last 40 years. We have never seen these kind of inflationary figures in Pakistan in the recent past. Now, really, there is very little the government can do. Again, it is trying to do administrative measures. Those administrative measures tend to be very ineffective. The best way to actually allow inflation to come down is to allow importation of foods, products from either Iran, India, or other countries, so that we don't tend to have these kind of inflationary pressures. But one of the reasons why there is this is the continuous depreciation of rupee. Now, again, how do you do that? One of the ways to do it is by raising interest rates. If you do that, that has an effect on output. So I'm afraid I don't have much positive news to say that all the options that the government has are very bad ones. Now, it needs, first and foremost, it needs to get back into the IMF program, release the sort of 2.3 billion that IMF needs to give. That will open up money from World Bank, and it will also ease pressure on the currency. That will help in terms of easing inflationary pressures. So
yes.
I really fail to see why government should pursue any other avenue rather than trying to make sure that we get back into the IMF program.
We're running short on time, but I want to quickly squeeze in one last question on the foreign investment front, sir. You know, forex reserves are at a low for some time now. Will we see any scheme in the budget to attract foreign investment?
There is talk of encouraging overseas Pakistanis to bring in money back to Pakistan or bring in money to Pakistan by giving tax concessions, to removing any disclosure laws. I don't know if that will meet the requirements of IMF and generally also FATF. So there are question marks about this. There are schemes being planned, but really where your international credit rating is so poor as being rated near junk, it's very difficult to see how Pakistan can at present encourage too much foreign direct investment.
All right, Syed Javed Hasan, thanks very much for joining us with your perspective. Always great to have you on the program, sir.
Thank you.